little realizing that we would actually get trapped in Boston. But the hotel had burning fireplaces in the
Ah,
suite.
nice.
Oh, I love
Boy,
it.
was it?
Okay,
Yeah.
Barbara, we are at long last live.
Live. Well, start us off then, kiddo.
Okay. Hey, this is Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore,
We
and I
can't
see
see
that
you. There you are.
you can't
Okay.
see me. Here we go. Hey, everybody, this is Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore in Scottsdale, Arizona. And forgive me for the technical difficulties. Our internet at the store went down. And so at the last minute, I had to race all the way home. So we're doing this a little bit late. So thanks for bearing with us. We are delighted to have Amy Pease with us today. She's going to be talking about her really critically acclaimed new book called Northwoods. And our good friend William Kent Krueger has kindly agreed to come in and talk to Amy along with Barbara. As always, I'll be monitoring the comments and questions on Facebook and YouTube. So if you have any questions for Amy or Kent, go ahead and put them in, and Barbara will bring me on screen towards the end of the hour, and I'd be happy to ask any questions you might have. So Barbara, over to you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. This is sort of a Midwest mystery night because even though I'm in Arizona, I actually grew up in Chicago, where winter was a very serious thing. They closed the school when it got to be 25 below zero. I can remember that when I was a kid because the boiler gave out. But we're having this weird weather in Phoenix where it's freezing. And as a result, all of the digital stuff is not working. So apologies for being late. I would like to thank Amy for signing copies of Northwoods, which are on their way to us, unless UPS flounders into a drift or whatever terrible thing might happen. And Kent gave an absolutely wonderful rave review to this book. And so I'm pleased, guys, that the Midwest is sort of making a renaissance in mystery because I keep asking why there are no like Chicago or Illinois set. It seemed to me that this is a part of the country that's largely overlooked. But what's interesting to me is that it seems to be focusing on Wisconsin. So is there something about Wisconsin that is particularly mysterious?
I've been hearing agents and editors lately talk about Midwest noir, so it must be the new hot thing.
I think it probably is, although Kent's been holding up his end of it for,
Well,
for
when
decades.
you said Renaissance or
Right.
Renaissance,
I speak British.
Midwest crime. Why do you think it's a rebirth? What came before Amy and me?
I think that mystery fiction for a long time has been sort of a coastal thing. It was either Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle, or very
So you're
much.
saying this is a new wave in
I think, because how publishing is, everybody rushes to do the same thing, but differently. And then
Mhm.
after a while, the same thing becomes the same thing once too often. And then everybody goes looking for new ground. It's why we have this romantasy thing going on. If you look at the bestseller list, which as far as I can tell, since I do the New York Times reporting and get it every week, it's been static now for what, like 8 weeks. The same books have been on the top. And I think that's kind of a measure that for right now, crime fiction is not, how it goes in waves. And right now it's down, but I think it's starting to come back up again. And the other interesting part is that I think maybe the whole twisty betrayal Gone Girl design may have sort of reached its peak, and maybe we're coming back to the more straightforward private eye or police. Or interestingly, here's what I think is really fascinating: the podcaster has become the new sleuth. It's true. If you look, I can't tell you how many books I've read where the true crime thing and the podcaster, that gives them an impetus to become an investigator, and bring people with them because they kind of, they crowdsource it. But anyway, I think the Midwest is an area that hasn't had a huge population of crime writers, and now everybody, there's a bunch of people writing it.
A lot, and as you point out, a lot of them from Wisconsin. So, what's going on in Wisconsin, Amy?
A lot of cool stuff. I don't know. um, you know what? I've lived here my whole life, so I can't really compare it to other places to gauge what might be different. But I think that there's a lot of nostalgia in the Midwest and, you know, especially in Wisconsin, which I think is something that I included in my book, is a glimpse of the nostalgia of the Northwoods of Wisconsin.
You know, I think one of the things too is just that it's kind of an exotic locale. You know, so much of crime fiction is, as you point out, on the coasts or in very large cities. But when those of us in the Midwest write a novel, typically it's going to be a rural setting, and I think that's refreshing in the genre. I so loved your sense of place, Amy. It was so dead on.
Thanks.
I love Shaky Lake. I have to say, I thought if you were going to name something, Shaky Lake has all sorts of connotations. What inspired you to call, because it's important in the book, what inspired you to call it Shaky Lake?
I was driving somewhere, I don't even know where it was, out in the middle of nowhere, and there was a lake that I passed that was called Shaky Lake, and I just remembered it, and years later decided to use it.
Well, it was
Hey, Amy,
inspired.
for those who are watching who aren't familiar with you or with Northwoods, maybe the elevator version of your story.
Yeah. So Northwoods is set in modern day Northwoods of Wisconsin, and it follows the story of Eli North, who is a sheriff's deputy in a small town. And Eli is also a Afghan war veteran, and he's going through a really tough time, to put it mildly. And in the middle of all of this personal crisis, one night on the job, he stumbles across the body of a boy who's been murdered. And then soon the boy's friend goes missing, the FBI gets involved. What started out as a local small town murder investigation becomes a much larger conspiracy with much more far-reaching implications.
So could you mention your medical background? Because I think in order to write this book well, your nurse practitioner career has been a crucial part.
Yeah, I definitely could not have written this book without 20 plus years of experience as a healthcare provider. Partly because, you know, there are elements in here that include things like big pharmaceutical companies and hospital scenes, a lot of, I think, portrayal of mental illness and addiction. Um, and I think that if I did not have the experience I have, it would be very easy for those sorts of themes to fall into cliche. Whereas I think that I have a deeper understanding of what life might look like for someone who's struggling with those sorts of things.
So what is Eli struggling with?
Eli is struggling with post-traumatic stress disorder related to a pretty specific event that happened when he was in Afghanistan. And then he, by way of medicating that, is abusing alcohol.
This book opens with this wonderful metaphorical scene, essentially of Eli treading water,
Mhm.
which is what his life is all about. I loved that opening of this novel.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
there
then
ended up being a lot of water metaphors in the book.
Hey, it's Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Lakes, rivers everywhere. If you don't tap into them, you know you're missing a great opportunity.
You kind of can't, it's hard to avoid having a water metaphor, really.
in the state and then around the state, I took, Ken probably knows this, but my husband and I took a cruise of the Great Lakes, which has now become a very popular, and it started in Duluth and went around Lake Superior. And then I got to Door County. I've never been to Door County, Wisconsin before. And then, Lake Huron and on through Erie and Ontario. And more of it was really on the Canadian side than it was on the US side. But it was really fascinating to, experience the middle of our country as though you were, in the Mediterranean or something. I mean, and it's so gorgeous.
Yeah, it's an exotic locale for people who have never really been up here before. You know, Amy, your book hit for me on two of the most important aspects of a novel that I'm going to be drawn in to read, and that's one, profound sense of place. You do it beautifully, and the other is the characters. When I used to teach creative writing, I would try to pound into my students' head the idea that a good story isn't about what happens. It's really about who it happens to. And you gave us characters that, particularly with Eli and Marge, I love Marge as well, that we could really embrace as fully human. Could you talk about developing these characters?
Yeah, Eli must have been living in my brain fully formed for a long time because when he first came onto the page, I knew him inside and out. I knew what choices he would make, what his flaws were. Marge, I developed a little bit more along the way. Um, I really like character-driven books, especially if they do also have a plot, which is why I think crime fiction can be really good in that regard. Um, I just there is emotion to a story that I think has to be there in order for me to enjoy reading something. Um, and there was a whole lot of emotion in this book, certainly. You know, it just it's these are real people.
Like
It's
what?
real
Like
life
the water.
people.
It's all around you in this story.
Yeah, it is.
Um, I thought that the character, I'm trying to remember her name, but the wife that comes into play, you know, the drug
Michelle.
addicted, whatever it is. I thought her story, Rachel, is that her name?
Oh,
Yeah,
Rachel. Yeah,
Rachel.
the mother.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rachel. I thought she was a surprise. You know,
Mhm.
you set her up one way, and when no spoilers there, but when we get to the end of the book, we see her quite differently. And I thought that was extremely well done because most of the time when you meet somebody like her, you just they're going to be a write-off, you know, they're not ever going to triumph over what's going on. And so I thought that was a very helpful note if you're, you know, developing character. I really like the ending of with her.
You know, one thing that I've learned as a healthcare provider too is that everyone stereotypes, it's just a natural thing to do, but they're usually not accurate. Um, and they certainly don't make for good fiction. So I wanted to depict folks struggling with things like addiction in a way that let people understand that the stereotypes we have about folks like that aren't the whole picture. So, you know, we have an image of someone who's addicted to heroin. Well, they must, you know, be sitting on a street corner with a sleeping bag next to them. It's just not true. Um, so it's important, I think, to push past a stereotype, and I hope I did that.
You know, there's a lot of suspense in this book that has nothing to do with people being in danger. That's a wonderful way to create suspense. But you've gone a more literary route in that there's so much tension in the relationships that exist in this book between Eli and his mother Marge, between Eli and Michelle, his estranged wife. Um, it really, in a lot of ways, it is a question of the the forces that seek to divide family, and then what is it that holds family together. I thought you explored that quite well here.
I love
Yeah,
Marge. I thought Marge was a really
Hmm.
marvelous character. She's the actual chief of police, or I think that's her title. But
the
anyway,
sheriff.
the sheriff, right?
Mhm.
And Eli is working for his mother, which already already creates some tension, right? Boys working for their moms. Um, that's difficult. But don't you think, Ken and Amy, that a lot of this is about Eli struggling with Eli? I mean, the most difficult relation Eli has in this book is with himself.
Absolutely. Lost complete control of himself, and he's a guy who's used to being in control, smart, capable, strong, both physically and mentally, you know, someone that can be relied upon. And that's all fallen apart. And he just has never had to deal with anything like that before. And he tried to find a way to get better, and it just didn't work. And he's drowning, you know, to use the metaphor again of the water.
And you know, he's a character who frustrated me as a reader because I kept hoping and I kept hoping. And he was like not getting there and he was not getting there. And I'm not going to say anything more about that because I don't want to spoil anything. But I want to come back for just a moment to something. You know, Barbara mentioned Marge as chief of police, which I understand could be confusing. she's actually the county sheriff,
Mhm.
but she has such a small force. There's like four people on this rural county. How did you do your research for that?
Oh my gosh. I did my research through a Facebook group called Cops and Writers. That was a big part of it. I also tried to keep any sort of procedural stuff as vague as I could,
Yeah, I get that.
just to not show the fact that I don't know anything about that sort of thing. I maybe that was one of the reasons that this focused a lot on Eli and his emotional arc because I was just, throwing things at the wall when it came to the actual crime procedures.
So here's a question. I mean, chiefs of police basically are town and sheriffs are basically counties, right? Isn't that how that works? San Francisco, I think, is the only city that's also a self-contained county. So I learned this from John LaSquire years ago. It has its own sheriff and its own police chief. Phoenix is in Maricopa County, and Maricopa County is like an entire state. It's so huge.
And
So,
you've had some interesting sheriffs in
oh
Maricopa
yeah.
County.
Yes, you could really write books about them. But anyway, the jurisdictional clashes can be very interesting, and they help. Often that conflict helps create more conflict in the story. But my question is, how big does a town have to be to deserve a police chief? Or in the areas that you're talking about, are there no police chiefs and it's just the sheriff because the towns are so tiny? I've never really thought about how big a town needs to be in order to have its own police force. And maybe that's a question of funding more than anything else. Is there a tax base for them to actually have a police department as opposed to using the sheriff?
I asked a similar question on that Cops and Writers Facebook group, and I got enough of a mixed bag of answers that it made it within the realm of possibility that a town would just have this much law enforcement. And also, I with Longmire, weren't there only a few people manning the station in Longmire, I think?
So you're basing all your research on what Craig Johnson does, huh?
Cross
Yeah.
population 2026. I'm actually supposed to be in New Cross, Wyoming right now, but because I got pneumonia, I had to cancel because it didn't seem like a really good idea to go to northern Wyoming right at the moment. But yeah, Craig, I think illustrates, of course, he has some supernatural help that creeps in and other stuff, which is interesting.
But it's not uncommon to have a fairly understaffed rural sheriff's department. Funding is a huge issue.
You bet it.
Well, and funding, when I think, because this is the first book in a series, and I will, down the road have certain other elements, of course, that come into it. So I sort of plant the seeds very early on, so I have stuff to work with. And funding, there are human beings who hold the purse strings, and human beings can have motivations that go in a different direction than public safety, shall we say.
Well, you don't show it to us. I mean, because he's not there anymore. He's been let go. But there is another law enforcement agency that Eli belonged to before he got downsized. And, so what is that a possibility of rebooting it? What is it? The Fish and Wildlife Department, I think it was.
Yeah, he was a special investigations warden for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And when he got back from Afghanistan, his job was waiting for him, but then within 6 months, the job was eliminated. And maybe someday that job will come back. That would be kind of, a cool thing to have happen for Eli someday.
Or to have somebody else have the job, which would create even more problems for Eli. Why don't we plot our second book, Ken? Why are we wasting our chance here?
So I have a question, sort of a developmental question for you, Amy. How long was this book in the process before before it's in the form that we see it now?
Yeah, I think I worked on this book for about 3 years, and then started querying. And so it was quite polished when I started querying. And so the form that you see it in now is pretty much the form I sold to the publisher. But I sold it to them June of 2022. So it's been a long time in the making.
Well, I watched an interview with you in which you talked about earlier iterations of the story in which there were like young babies involved or something like this. So this story really did evolve over time. I'd like to know kind of where it began. And
Well,
I'd like to know, are you a mystery reader? And is that why, with your debut piece of fiction, you chose to write a mystery?
I do read mysteries. I wouldn't say that it's the primary genre I reach for. I actually really um like bodice rippers, historical romance, like very genre paperback only, Um the way that this story came to play is that I was bored on my commute to work and I challenged myself to think of an image, just whatever first popped into my mind. And it was a melancholy man floating in a lake at night. And suddenly, at last, by Etta James starts playing over
Oh,
coming
interesting.
across the lake. And it was so vivid that, like I got to wherever it was I was driving and wrote that down. And the next probably 2 or 3 chapters just poured out. And it was so vivid that I knew that it was something that I needed to explore more. I guess I just knew it was a crime fiction right away. And I don't know why, but enough of the beginning of it poured out right away that I guess I'm writing a crime novel.
Or two or three.
I hope so. I hope at least 3. Yeah.
All right, so let's ask you that question, Mr. Krueger, about Iron Lake, which was your first book for Cork O'Connor, your first book, and our first time together. So, what inspired you to write Iron Lake as a crime novel?
Well, my father was a high school. This is a story I tell audiences all the time. And it's a story I love to tell. So my father was a high school English teacher, and when I was 18 years old, he insisted I read Ernest Hemingway, and I fell madly in love with Hemingway. And I tried for a very long time to write the great American novel as Ernest Hemingway might have written it. Stupid on so many levels. But then I went through my early 40s in a midlife crisis and thought, the hell with trying to write the great American novel. I want to write something somebody might actually want to read. So I looked around me to see what everybody reads. Everybody reads mysteries. It's a genre whose appeal cuts across all socioeconomic levels, all age demographics, all ethnic groups. So I decided I'm going to write a mystery. And the reason I asked about the development of your debut novel here was it took me 4 years to write the manuscript for my first novel, Iron Lake, and because I was I was working full time first of all, and you still work full time?
Yep.
Yep. And I was learning how to write. Was learning how to write a mystery. So there you go.
And you were
Yeah,
And
it was
I
really
sorry, I just had to ask him if he was distracted by the coffee shop, but he tells me that actually that's where he is most comfortable writing or used to be. But sorry, carry on.
well, I was just going to say that my writing process for Northwoods was the biggest mess. It was I knew the first 3 chapters and then I knew the finale chapter and I didn't know anything in between. And so it was this weird, messy process that I don't recommend that to any new writers at all. I mean, the only reason I know that now that I'm working on the second book in the series, I'm just going on faith that I can pull it off because I did it once before.
Do you find we talked about this very early in my career, Barbara, the sophomore slump, the
Mhm.
second book. Amy, you have come up with a book that I think is going to probably get a lot of nominations. And the challenge then is how to follow it up. But one thing I want to tell you is don't worry about that. Write the book you want to write, just
Yeah.
pour your heart into it, and the hell with all of that stuff.
But here's
Oh yeah, I
another.
mean, worrying about it doesn't help.
Yeah.
No,
Certainly.
but Amy, how long has it been since you turned in this book and we came to publication? Has it been a long time?
So I sold the book to Emily Bessler Books in June 2022, and I think submitted officially the manuscript in November 2022. So it's
Okay, so
been
this came up, Kent, when I was talking to JT Ellison and Jane Ann Krentz on their launch, or maybe it was last night. I don't know. They all, whatever.
Yeah.
But anyway, what we recognize is that the time to publication is long. It's really longer than it used to be. And what that actually means is that the writer is less in danger of a sophomore slump because the pressure is not on producing a book in like 6 or 8 months.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
You now have time while that whole process is going on with your first book, which after all, you wrote when nobody really knew or possibly even cared that you were writing it, you know, so you had forever. But now the time stretch allows you to take a lot more time with your second book. And that, I think, was really the problem with the sophomore slump, is that most of the time the book had to be written too fast.
If you don't mind me asking, Amy, when's the deadline on the second manuscript?
Oh, I'm not on contract for it.
Wonderful. Great. No pressure.
So the second book is just, it lives in my computer and that's it.
Great. So you have plenty of time to develop
there's
it.
nothing official except for to me.
Just as an aside here, you're with Emily Bessler Books, a great imprint from Simon and Schuster. Emily was my editor for a very long time.
Oh,
Yeah. And so you've got you're with a good organization there.
they're wonderful. I've you know, you hear when you're aspiring to become a writer, you hear a lot of stuff about what to expect in the publishing process, and most of it is pretty discouraging. So I have gotten the what to me feels quite like the Cadillac treatment here with this book, and I am so thankful.
Hmm. I've been with Simon and Schuster 25 years. I think they're great.
Mhm.
They are great. And, you know, just as we talked about cycles in publishing and so forth, there are also cycles in publishers, which are the, you know, because they
Oh
tend to
yeah.
rise and fall. And it's largely powered by who's actually running the company. And
Yeah.
Simon & Schuster was extremely fortunate. They had a very powerful woman who died unexpectedly out of the blue.
Yeah,
Jonathan
sadly.
Karp has been able to take over and do an amazing job. So Simon & Schuster, years ago, you probably remember this, Kent, didn't really, their philosophy was that if we published it, readers will come. I mean, they didn't make any huge effort, this is a long time ago, to do marketing or whatever it is. And
Oh, I
now,
remember those days.
oh yeah. And now I have to say, I think they are among the savviest and most, what's the word I want?
Supportive of
Yeah,
their authors.
supportive, but also, I mean, there's not a day that goes by that my email does not have something from Simon & Schuster Marketing with various books and so forth in it. They really get behind their authors and they're doing an amazing job. And so right now I rate them, you know, as one of the top 2 publishers. And years ago, I didn't feel that way. So, you know, it's great to, you know, to stick with one. I like the fact that you've always been there, Kent, and your backlist is all there too. So, you know, they've treated you extremely well. And
Yeah, I think
well,
you've got great
no,
things ahead of you, Amy,
yeah.
with SNS. Now I have a question for you, Amy. Um, you have a job, you have children, yes.
Mhm.
Talk to me about when you find time to write. How do you do that? How do you go about do you have a daily routine? What goes on?
I don't know. I don't know when I write. I think on weekends, sometimes I'll be like to my husband, like, I'm gonna go to the coffee shop for 4 hours. You got the kids, and just try and sneak in things like that. It is a very slow process. And you know, I'm hoping that with, you know, potentially sometimes sooner rather than later, I can maybe cut back on hours a little bit at work to find time to write, because after the kids go to bed is not my most creative time, that's for sure.
You know, when I was really working hard on my early novels, I cut back my hours. So I was working 6 hours a day rather than 8. And I got to tell you, Amy, it made an enormous difference. I was able
Mhm.
to, you know, focus that on my writing. So good luck with that. I hope you're able to accomplish that.
I
Yeah,
do too.
right now I have a day off every other week. And
Okay.
that is my day to write. But
That's
otherwise,
it. A day off, 1 day off every other week. You should join the union.
yes.
Is that a
Oh,
reflection
yes.
on
Yep.
medical care in Wisconsin, or are you still
What's-
a nurse practitioner?
Yeah, yep. I'm a full-time nurse practitioner, HIV specialist. And my husband is a full-time middle school teacher, so just having him have a high intensity job too, and then our kids are second and third grade, so it's just a
Oh
lot
man.
of energy.
Oh man.
Well, I commend you for producing a book at all. That's
Well, there
really
you go.
phenomenal.
You know
Yeah.
what that says to me is that there's a passion inside you that found a way to get this first book done. It's going to find a way to get the second and the third and all those that follow.
Yeah,
So
and if folks ever ask me, advice for for an aspiring writer, it's that you've got to really want to do this because it's very difficult. There's a lot of frustrations and setbacks. So your drive to succeed needs to be ironclad. And I do have that, thankfully. So, but otherwise, there's got to be something keeping you going.
So what was your quest for an agent? Because you can't actually do this all by yourself.
Mhm. Well, I just did things a real traditional way. I just decided, okay, I'm ready to start querying and started reaching out to agents, anybody that I could find that seemed to maybe want a novel like mine. And I found my agent, Amanda, with Bookends in about maybe like a month. So it went really quickly.
Oh my goodness.
That's
Mhm.
amazing.
And she and I polished the manuscript a little bit, and then she shopped it to like maybe a handful of editors at publishers, and that went really quickly too. That was like a couple weeks.
That's astonishing. Sometimes that whole process takes months.
Yeah.
Well, and it's not like I only queried a couple agents and that was that. I think I like made myself a goal of querying 10 a week or something like that. So it was actually a lot of people who said no to me. I just did it in a real compact way.
Ah, okay. Right.
Yeah.
So another question I have, in your writing a rural book, there's always, not always, but frequently there's an animal that is a key part of the cast. So if you were to put one in, or if you put one in, what sort of animal would you have?
There's a dog. Eli has a dog.
That's
He had
right.
to give it up when he
Yeah.
moved out. And her name is Bella, and everyone is pretty convinced that she's actually a wolf. And in fact, I came up with a mood board of inspiration pictures for all the characters, and Bella's inspiration photo is a Game of Thrones direwolf.
I mean, I think it's kind of a natural thing, if you're writing something, especially with woods and, all of that, that there needs to be a dog, really, basically, or a wolf.
Oh,
Yeah,
Probably
everyone's got a dog.
in my early Cork O'Connor novels, there were dogs. Cork had dogs. Henry Malou had dogs. People
right.
love dogs. I don't know. They love cats too, apparently. I'm a dog person.
Well, I think a cat is perhaps not as potent, in the setting that you've got there. Cats seem to be, a little more domesticated, but dogs can, run. And then there's fishing. And fishing, seems like a natural in a place that's all full of water. So there's fishing in the book, and it's a very nice fishing scene that kind of brings the book to an end, which I very much enjoyed. So.
Yeah.
Are you a fisher person, or is there one in your family, or did you just sort of wing it?
Oh, I mean, I have fished. My husband's a big fisherman. I've just
Mm.
been around it all my life, and this is something that probably Kent can attest to too. And I think this is Minnesota's like this too, but in Wisconsin, hunting and fishing are huge things, culturally,
And
everybody
economically.
hunts.
Yeah.
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 So, when because if there are some authors that have like I think some of the military thriller authors have websites where they are on their Instagram or whatever, they'll um have sponsorships with like knife companies and stuff, and that's just like totally normal to me. My dad always had a buck knife on his
Mhm.
belt,
Yeah.
always.
Yes, there's a prominent A3 author who definitely has weapons as
Yes.
part of his shtick.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes,
And
we know that.
it's funny, and I'm referring to Jack Carr, which is
Of course
possibly
you
what you're
are.
referring to too.
Sure.
We get.
So
Right.
I went to BoucherCon, which is the Mystery Writers of America national conference. I went there this past summer, and I was terrible at networking. I just clammed up. I felt like the new kid on the first day at a new high school. And the only person I could get the courage up to say hi to was Jack Carr. And, you know,
And didn't he turn
he
out to
was
be a nice guy?
he was so nice. He was
He
so
is.
nice.
He's
We
one
have
of
the
the
same
nicest
publisher.
people ever. And I
Yeah.
always laugh when I say that, because I'm pretty sure Jack could kill any one of us with one finger. But he is,
Oh, yeah.
seriously, he is so nice. He really is.
Oh,
It's
he ran around and introduced me to a whole bunch of people. He was just so, so nice.
Well, that's great. I'm glad you had a good experience with that. So, Kent, where are you planning to appear? You're pretty, pretty, what's the word? I was going to say relentless, but that doesn't seem fair.
Mobile.
No, you're very good about traveling and meeting your fans and doing very long tours and so forth. Are you going to any conventions coming up?
Well, I have a lot of appearances across the country, many one book, one community library reads.
Yeah.
I love those programs. I'll be in South Carolina this weekend for a fundraiser for Mary Alice Monroe and a literacy program that she supports. I'll be honest with you, Barbara, I'm stepping back a little bit. I did almost 100 events last year across the country, and I got a little burned out. I love meeting people. Amy, you're going to love this too. When you do an event and it's a live event and you have an audience and they're there because they love what you do, the energy there is just like nothing else. Like it is a high no drug will ever give you. So I love the events, but the travel can be exhausting.
I'm trying not to laugh because before you went on your 100 Odyssey, you told me you were cutting back.
Yeah, I know. I say that every year, I think.
Right. So there we are. I'm not sure that there's not a different form of addiction in play here, but
Well,
hard to say
I'm in a
no.
fortunate position. Amy, you have young children. It's hard to get
Yeah.
away to do a tour like that if you have young children. But I broke into the business when I was much older than you are, so my children were grown, and I had the freedom to do that kind of thing.
And your wife retired, which was a
Yeah,
really,
exactly.
an
Helps.
additional bonus, as you could do that together. But anyway, this has been a very exciting time for you, Amy. And I want to congratulate you on the great reviews, a starred review from Publishers Weekly, a starred review from William Kent Krueger, starred review from me, and possibly other prestigious publications and so forth. So good for you.
It was in this prestigious publication.
Woohoo!
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
Wow.
It was in this right there.
There you are. I love it.
See, that's the great work of your publicist at Emily Bessler. Yeah,
Yes.
Yeah, they're
Yes.
very, very
Shout out
good.
to Holly Rice.
there you go.
Now, Patrick, come and join us and tell us if there are any questions from the Facebook who might have all left after we got a late script, but maybe they came back. Oh,
Well, thankfully, they all stayed.
oh, good.
Let's see here. Yeah, I have quite a few questions. One is from Pam. Amy, what was your childhood like, and were you always a reader?
Oh, yes. So really traditional, I have a sister. We grew up in sort of a middle class Wisconsin town, Green Bay area.
Mm.
My earliest book memory though is that my great grandpa gave me his 1908 first edition copy of Anne of Green Gables when I was 8 or 9 years
Wow.
old. And that was when, because Anne becomes an author in the books. And that was when I thought, well, I think I want to do that too. And at about the same time, in like second grade, there was some essay competition that I won. And my second grade teacher told me I was a good writer. So I very much internalized that.
Right, let's see. Okay, Renee says Amy needs to find someone to take care of her kids, dogs, and husband.
That's not a question.
Not
That's
necessarily in that order.
Oh, that's right.
Right.
Let's see. Question is about I'm sorry. Are either of you coming to Left Coast Crime? So happy Barbara will be there. That's what Robin says.
Probably
I love
not.
Left Coast Crime. I have to be honest, I love it better than I love Bauscherkon because it's a little more intimate.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just, but I have to skip it this year, so I won't be at Left Coast this year. But I will be at Bauscherkon. Amy, you going to be at Bauscherkon?
I will. I'm going to be going there and then probably to Thriller Fest.
Okay.
Wonderful. That sounds great. I'm luckily going to Left Coast Crime, which I agree with Kent. VoucherCon is just capping out at 2,000 people. And Left
Yeah.
Coast Crime is probably 500 or 600, maybe gets a little bit higher. And I'm going to have a fun thing to do because the publisher of Amazon and I are both going to interview the guest of honor, Robert Dugoni, who is one of my very favorite people. And so I'm really looking forward to that. But I don't get to go to VoucherCon because Douglas Preston, one of my favorite people again, has written an opera. And it is going to debut, are you ready for this? On the Thursday of VoucherCon. And then they're going to burn Zozobra in Santa Fe, which is what the opera is all about, the 65-foot, thing with the green, on Friday night, which would leave me only Saturday to go and make my way through 2,000 people. And so I decided that it probably isn't going to work. So, our loyalties are, friends trump other things, right? In this case, it dictates what's happening. But for those of you interested in VoucherCon, which is the International Mystery Conference, it's going to meet in New Orleans in 2025, and then, yay, in Alberta, in Canada again in 2026. Canada has hosted one in Toronto. I'm trying to remember. Have they done maybe two in Toronto? I think that might be it. But anyway, I think it's great, that it's going to move to other countries, or at least
It really truly will be international.
Yeah, right. Plus, if you go to Alberta, Banff is just across. I mean, it's like an hour, so it gives you a great chance to do some beautiful scenery. But anyway, those are all great. Amy, Thriller Fest is the end of May. Right. So you're planning on going to that?
I am. These are always at the worst possible time for parents with kids. It's like the
Yeah.
very end of the school year, and VoucherCon is the very beginning of the school year. And like I said, my husband is a middle school teacher, so
Right.
it just, but you know what? Needs must.
Well,
There you
Thriller
go.
Fest used to be after the 4th of July, and VoucherCon can be anywhere from the end of November to Labor Day. It's just sort of a fluke that it's been at Labor Day for the last couple of years, but it's a function really of hotels and other stuff that control it. So there's no set schedule for these events. You just have to pay attention to them. And Left Coast Crime meanders all the way from February to this year till the middle of April.
And for
Anyway,
anybody out there who has lots of favorite mystery authors,
yeah,
if you VoucherCon's open to everybody, and it's this year, it's in Nashville, and if you were to register, you would probably be able to belly up to the bar with some of your favorite mystery authors. I guarantee that.
that's right. It's great for fans, but it's also good for aspiring writers too, because you
There you
get a
go.
chance to
Networking.
Yeah. Or just learn from panels and for other things. And agents hang out there, and publishers, editors often go. So, it's a great way to, it's an economical way because there's a clump of people. Anything else, Patrick?
Yeah, several people are kind of curious about the cover design, and it's really beautiful design. And did you have any input into that?
I did. So they sent me an initial drawing, and it didn't look at anything like Wisconsin. It was a very similar scene with a guy standing like on a dock next to a lake, but it looked like coastal Georgia or something like that. So I just pulled an image off the internet of basically a photo of a guy standing on a Wisconsin lakeshore at sunset, and they pretty much just made it into this cover.
It was beautiful. And the
Yeah,
lighting
it's
was
in
gorgeous.
fact, they said that it was a struggle because it was too pretty. Like they had to find ways to make it look more ominous and not quite so beautiful.
Let's see. Barbara, VoucherCon, wasn't it just in New Orleans not too long ago?
No, it was, but didn't it get canceled? It was
Yeah.
COVID, I think, wiped it
That's the
out.
last one. That's the last one I actually went to, was in 2016.
Yeah, now it that's why it's going back to New Orleans kind of out of turn because of the weather. And I think, it's getting harder and harder to predict the effect of weather on almost anything. And so, even if you make plans to go to a lot of these things, you have to be prepared for an interruption. But, we can hope for the best. Right.
We have a number of people that are curious about book 2. Is there anything that you can reveal about it?
Ah.
Well, I can reveal that Alyssa Mason, the FBI agent, is back in Shaky Lake.
Oh.
Yep. And the sort of loose threads at the very end of Northwoods are things that get picked back up as part of a larger conspiracy.
Ooh, I like that.
I love a good conspiracy.
Who doesn't? Yeah. Shaky Lake is actually a good title, don't you think?
Oh,
Might be.
Oh,
that's really, you know what? I do not
Sounds
have a
like a
title for the second book. I'll keep that in mind.
sounds like a Kent Krueger title.
I was
Yep.
just thinking the same thing, Patrick.
Yeah.
You
Shaky
know,
Lake.
Amy, I read Northwood shortly after I had done an event in Minocqua. And when I was reading, I'm going, boy, this is so like Minocqua. Did you
Hmm.
did you have a particular place in mind, or was it just you wanted to capture the essence of that kind of community?
It is a fictionalized mashup of Minocqua with maybe a little bit of Lake Geneva thrown
Okay.
in. Hmm.
Like
Yeah,
Geneva.
especially because of the Prohibition era gangster stuff, because
Oh
in
yeah.
Minocqua is the little Bohemia where John Dillinger had the shootout with the FBI. Like that stuff is all still there.
Lake Geneva has changed so much. When I was a child, my grandparents had a cottage on Lake Geneva, which was very low key and the whole bit. Now I understand, it's totally
Fancy.
changed, right? Mega mansions and all kinds of, I mean, I haven't been there obviously for decades, but it's interesting that, how I used to live for a while in Tennessee in a place where it was very rural. There weren't any big houses, it was a little tiny country club, the whole 9 yards. And then somehow or other, people decided that they wanted the rural life, and all of a sudden, mega mansions popped up everywhere, and everything changed. Do you think that rural Wisconsin is because Ken in his books, northern Minnesota became a real kind of Gilded Age playground, didn't it, Ken, for people with big money that would go up there and have fabulous hunting lodges and all?
Yeah, just try to get lakefront property anymore at a reasonable price. It doesn't exist.
Mm.
And I'm sure it's the same in Wisconsin up north.
Oh yeah, we stayed at a friend's cabin in Tomahawk, which is pretty close to Minocqua. And you look up and down at whatever real estate's for sale, and it's all $1 million
Yeah,
plus
yeah.
for fairly small places.
Right. And there's riverfront property in Wisconsin too. Let's not forget that the Mississippi comes. I really enjoyed going down after the St. Paul voucher con. Rob and I went from Red Wing, ostensibly St. Paul, but they lied to us. It was really Red Wing, down to St. Louis. And we stopped in several places. My dad grew up in Perry, Iowa. So, I kind of thought that I knew something about, well, actually, maybe it's Iowa. Does Wisconsin have a Mississippi border?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
It does, doesn't it?
Dubuque. Yeah.
Dubuque, right? Okay, right. So anyway, when I was a kid, it was a big deal to drive from Chicago over to the river just to watch I know that sounds hilarious, but we used to pile into the car and drive over just to watch the Mississippi run. That was our idea of a really great vacation. Oh, how things have changed. Right. Anything else, Patrick?
Let's see. Yeah, did you study to be a nurse, or did you always want to be a writer? Guess those aren't mutually exclusive, but
I always wanted to be a writer. I guess when it came to, college, I opted to go the practical route. I mean, what's more practical than being a nurse? So I opted to go that route, and I liked it well enough, but I've always had, and I've been doing this for nearly 25 years, and I have always had a bit of an imposter complex that I never quite got over with it. And so now as an author, I feel like that's a lot more authentic to who I really am. So that's a good feeling to have, for the first time when I'm 45.
She wasn't much younger than you.
How
Mm-mm.
much? You
No,
don't look 45.
no, she doesn't.
Good.
You look
Something's working
much
then.
younger.
But I like that idea that, you feel more authentic.
Yeah.
Did that happen to you, Kent? Did you feel more authentic once you actually became a writer?
Yeah, I was actually able to tell people I'm a writer and and really back it up.
Well, I
Actually,
mean,
I don't know about you, Amy. I've always been a writer. It took me to me until I was 48 years old to become an author.
Yeah, where you put something, seen it through to the end and sold it.
Yeah.
So is your distinction that a writer is a writer, but an author is a published writer?
That I would make that distinction because you know, almost everybody I know is a writer. Much fewer of them are authors, you know.
I think that's a fair summation. Yep.
Absolutely. Well, it's wonderful that Kent has been leading his best life the entire time I've known him, but now I get a chance to talk to Amy. One of the things that's been the most fun in doing this for 35 years is to talk to first-time writer, to debut authors. Not every bookstore really wants to do that because, you know, it's not necessarily profitable, but I think the most fun Patrick and I have had over, you know, all these years together is meeting new authors, introducing people to new voices, championing, you know, debuts and avoiding the obvious.
And for me, one of the sincere pleasures in this business is when I get to read something like Northwoods from an author nobody first time and just get my socks knocked off by how good it is.
Oh gosh, thank you so much. That's, yep, wow. Very dazzling praise. Thank you.
Well, on that note, before you burst into tears, we will say what a pleasure. Unless Patrick, I'm sorry, unless I'm kidding.
Yeah.
More question. Oops.
Yeah, and since we started a little late, I figured we could run over 5 minutes or so. Yeah, do you plan to write any medical mysteries, or will your day gig figure into your fiction at all?
It already does. There's a lot of insider knowledge. You know what? I tried really hard not to cram anything down people's throat in this book, you know, like issues, because there are issues like, you know, addiction and whatever. And I tried not to be too preachy about it and make it feel like a public safety announcement. But it finds its way into my writing.
Well,
And
there's
speaking of crying, I will say the one thing that has gotten me really emotional in this whole process was listening to the audiobook version of this. I don't
Just
know
gonna ask
why
you
that got
about that.
me.
wow. Oh, good for you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, I
so
can
many
say
people
that
are listening to audiobooks these days. It's huge part of the marketplace now.
very
Yeah.
much so. Right. Anything else now?
There's curiosity about, you know, the opening lines of a book, you know, like the first couple lines. Um, do you have time to like maybe read a sentence or two and then tell us, did those remain unchanged, or how did that work?
They did. So the first chapter, as you see it, is very little changed from the very first draft. So, and in fact, the first paragraph for sure is the exact first paragraph that I wrote when I first, years and years ago, sat down to write it. So
Oh,
I
wow.
can read that if you want.
Awesome. Yeah.
Okay. Eli North stripped off his clothes and waded into the water. The lake muck cushioned his feet, and when he was in up to his chest, he rested his plastic travel mug on the water's surface and let his feet drift upward. He had always been good at floating.
That's a key sentence. He'd always been good at floating. And
Yeah.
then he suffers a concussion. And I thought, and then later there's a lawnmower accident and all. And I thought
Ooh,
that's where your
I know.
medical, I know, but that's where your medical treatment, I thought, and there's a stabbing. I mean, there's a lot of stuff here that I think has extra resonance and authenticity because Amy writes it as somebody who knows her way around a body, right?
True.
Do you find that people in fiction, since you have this background, they recover way too fast, you know, from some of these injuries that they have? Do you notice that, or does that
I
not
don't
necessarily?
notice it as too much of a problem. I guess sometimes you're just I would say most authors that I read must have put in a bit of time and effort to make sure that things weren't totally implausible.
Gotcha. I think that's about it, Barbara.
Wonderful. Well, let me say again, Congratulations to you.
Thank you so much.
Oh, please, it's just a brilliant moment, for us and a gratifying moment, I think, for you, as a newly published author to have a chance to talk to fans and to have an icon like William Kent
I
Krueger.
know.
I know.
I didn't know, Barbara, that Kent was joining us until I re-looked at your email with the Zoom link in it, and because there had been nothing in the communication about it
I was trying to surprise you, and also
I know.
I
And
never
you did
took it.
surprise me, except for then I actually went down and looked at the whole email, days and days later, and I freaked out. I'm so pleased. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure, Amy.
Yeah.
You're a real champ. I mean, Kent obviously has a very heavy schedule, and I so much appreciate the fact that you took out an hour here to do this with us. So many thanks. And I thank all of you for joining us tonight. Stay safe, stay warm wherever you are. And by all means, grab a copy of Northwoods. So we have our signed books coming, and actually we're going to have more signed books coming because I think I need to order more. So don't miss your chance. The thing is, the great thing about doing it with a first novel is that you get bragging rights, right? Because you can say you were there. It wasn't, and you can't ever duplicate that. If you miss a first novel, you never really get that chance ever again. Mm-hmm. It's like, being a virgin all over again, right? A book virgin, one of my favorite things.
Well, Iron Lake was a selection of our first mystery club.
It was absolutely true. Yeah. That was a banner.
Thank you.
Well, it was a banner year for Midwest Mystery because it was you and Steve Hamilton. It was you in Minnesota and Steve in Northern Michigan. And, it was a really big 1-2 punch that year. So
started putting the North Country on the map.
Yeah,
that's right.
Indeed. Anyway, thanks everybody for joining us. Thank you, Amy, very much. Stay in touch.
Thank you.
Good night, Kent. Have a wonderful, safe trip to South Carolina, where in theory it will be warmer than Wisconsin or Minnesota.